had Douglas out at WebVisions a couple of years ago, and he keynoted out there, and frankly, it was one of the highlights of that year's sessions. The great thing about that year too was that we had this thing called the Web Visionary Awards right afterwards, and I had a car full of robot equipment and costumes, and Douglas and my kids and I raced down to like the club to go to do this event, and we're all sitting in the car and just talking, and I thought, you know, this is one of the great moments of doing the show, because people ask me all the time, why do you guys do this show anyway? Because this is not your business, this isn't your full-time business, you have a day job, and it's because of this, it's because of the community aspect of it, it's because of the ability to just sit down and talk with somebody in a car loaded full of robot gear, costumes, and then later on, Douglas was sitting on the stairs at the event, the venue, talking with Amber Case, I think about cyborg anthropology or something, but it's just these kind of casual conversations that you all hopefully will have with each other during this event, that the speakers will have as they're sitting in the audience watching other people talk, and I think that's where some of the magic is, and I hope that you can enjoy part of that by being here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Douglas Rushkoff. Let's give him a big, huge hand.
So this is all new material. They say never, if you're a stand-up comedian, never do all new material, you just throw in one new joke. Because it's all new material, I've been kind of assessing its relevance, right? So especially on the way here, I was thinking, is this relevant? Is this relevant? And I was standing on the subway, and I was standing on the subway. There's this this ad for NBC News, whatever. It says, "The Now, it's up before you are." I was like, "The Now? Oh, that's cool. That's sort of a good omen, right? That there's now." So I started looking around the subway and see if there were other good omens for my present shock thing. And this whole, and I was like, oh my gosh, this one. Every day we travel back in time. I was like, well, that's a cool statement about present. They're not even just in the present or in the future. They can go back into, so now we have time travel. Then I looked over there, and it was one of those MTA ads. And what's next? Like weekends? The Weekender is now 24/7. Right? It's continuous. It's continuous. You know, we're always on. We're constantly changing. This is all in the same car. And then I looked around and thought, there's not going to be any more. But then there was. And there was even this one, life's too short for ramen. Life's too short for ramen, right? The food you love, whatever, or whenever, wherever. So the wherever is cool, but it's the whenever, right? So there's 3, 4 things on there that it's like, okay, we're here in the now, which really isn't the now, but the now, this is before you're now. We're there. While you're here, we're doing. Before you're up, we're doing it. You know, everything is now. Everything is so real time, and I realize this is not just my perception, right? This is an advertised statement about where we are. Everybody is saying, all of these companies are saying, we are in the now. We can time travel. Life is too short. We can be always on. We are 24/7. We are continuous. We are here. We are pulsing in the moment. Right? Everybody is here now. And for me, there's 2 things going on here. One, yes, there's this now of our pings, the kind of simultaneous, always-on, real-time, pervasive universe of now that the internet brings to us. It's the now she was just talking about in the conversation, where content is no longer this thing that you bind in a book and put away. Content is this sort of live stream of stuff, and how you have to get your clients to think of content not as the stuff that you put up, but as something that's a kind of a steady state of change. You know, it's the way of looking at the content of media, say, less in terms of the subjects in our media than almost the standing wave that these subjects fill. Like when I look at an event like, whatever, say, you know, the Charlie Sheen virus that got all huge, right? I look and I said, that has nothing to do with Charlie Sheen. For me, what that has to do with is, well, we just had this whole big Iran-Iraq stuff and this revolution and Arab Spring. We were also serious in the media, and that kind of
creates a cultural standing wave, this negative space for something just utterly stupid to go in there, right? But it's the standing wave that matters, not Charlie Sheen, right? None of these stories matter as content. So that's really, to me, that's what she's talking about in a presentist context, right? Is that content is just this stuff that flows through this other structure, right? And is that structure is this now that I'm talking about? It's certainly that matters to you guys as web people. So there's that. There's this always real-time ping thing that's going on, right? That sort of now that we can all relate to. But I think there's a bigger now that we've moved into, and that's the now of being in what I would consider a presentist society. You know, in the late 90s, it seemed that everything was about the future. Everyone was talking about futurism. There was the Global Business Network. There was Alvin Toffler and Future Shock. We were all kind of leaning forward toward the millennium. The .com thing happened and all these companies. You know, remember those business plans that would always be like, well, you know, there's 300 million bicycle riders in America, and if each one of them spends $30 on bicycle parts, then bicycleparts.com should be able to make... Remember those things? They were all these sort of future-leaning, leaning forward things towards the millennium. And we got this great sort of, remember the long boom, and everything's just going to go over. We're going to go over the top. We're going to go over the lip of the strange attractor at the end of time. Right, the Y2K bug, which many of you are probably too young to remember. The idea that once we move to 4 digits in our dates in our computers, that the planes were going to fall from the sky because they weren't going to know how to calculate time. KLM grounded all but 2 of their flights on Y2K because they were actually scared. They just didn't know. Are they going to fall from the sky? Is this going to happen? Or we had the harmonic convergence, and we had all these things that were leaning forward. And then we finally got to 2000, and it was like, well, what? Right? I remember watching CNN as they did the New Year's celebrations. They did Australia and New Guinea and here and there, waiting for terrorism or something to explode, or the Mayan Tzolk'in calendar to come out of the heavens or something. And it just happened. Right? And 2 months later, we had the .com crash. Now, why was that? I don't think it's because something changed about the internet. I think it's because we went from being a future-leaning, future-focused society to a, well, wait a minute. Rather than what are these stocks going to be worth when the thing happens, what are these stocks worth right now? What is this? This is worth nothing. And everybody freaked out. This is nothing. Right? It was that sort of Poe Bronson moment of what was I doing? What is my life worth now? Right? So those two things, right? This digitalness, right, which is very new, and then the end of this leaning forward, the end of this sort of 20th century leaning forward, all this futurism suddenly stopped making sense because we were in the future. Right? And this is my little, oh, where'd it go? Is there no thing up there? Oh, there they are. So this is sort of my way of understanding the change that we've just gone through. That I see us as having moved from thinking about the world this way to thinking about the world that way. Right? And these are fundamentally different ways of understanding time. When I was a kid, I had an alarm clock next to my bed that looked like that, my little clock radio, and I would watch it, and if I couldn't fall asleep, I'd be watching that second hand and just watch it go all the way and then see if I could maybe see the motion in the minute hand as I go, and it's almost 4:30, what is that, 4:30 or 4:40, 4:42, almost 4:42, almost 4:42, almost 4:41, and almost, now it's 4:42. All right, it flopped. My clock didn't do that. It was actually continuous. Right? And then my dad, he always got these presents from other people, and he replaced my clock with one of these. Right? And then when I lived in this world, it was very different. All of a sudden, I'm just sitting there at 4:43, 4:43, 4:43, 4:43, 4:43, 4:43. Right? And I just sit and wait and maybe try to, mine didn't flash like that either. It was like a railroad thing that just went, it actually physically moved every time you remember those ones where the minute changed, it flapped down? So I would try to count out and see if I could be exactly on that thing, exactly on that. But this experience of time for me was plateaus. It's just, I'm not in 443 leaning into 444. I'm in 443. I'm just here. Right? And that's the difference between digital time and analog time. That's the difference between the digital age and the industrial age. That's the difference between, well, a whole lot of stuff, but presentism versus futurism, an ahistorical world versus a historical one. You know, I was in Disney World just last week, and there was you know how they put those signs when you get on the line? It says like 90 minutes, 90 minutes wait from here. I saw this little girl, it wasn't mine, but someone else's little girl looked at that sign, and then she said, "Daddy, how long is a minute?" And I was thinking, that's really interesting, because in this world, a minute is what? A minute is a 60th of an hour, which is a 24th of a day. A minute is this little portion of a day. In this world, what's a minute? In this world, a minute is an absolute segment of time. A minute is a duration, right? It's a duration floating in time, as opposed to here, where it's anchored in some real event, in something that actually happened. Right? The difference between this world and that one is every single moment in this world is another moment of choice. It's another place from which we can do this, we can do that. Here you're part of some story, you're part of something, we're moving, we're going, we're on our process, now we're in this minute. What are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with that? What are we going to do with this minute? Right? Every single pulse, every single minute is a potential interruption. It's another moment of choice. That's the way we experience time in an atemporal world. It's the beauty of choice of, say, Netflix. Right? Netflix now, they have this House of Cards series, right? And rather than thinking we're not like TV, we're not bound to the clock, we're not bound to the schedule, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to throw up the whole thing, right? All 13 episodes on the same day and let people watch when they're going to watch it, right? This is the digital age. You should have choice of when you watch it, right? And that, on the one hand, is a beautiful thing, right? We can jam the whole thing into one weekend and do, binge watching. We can watch it slowly. We can wait till next year and hear what people have said about it and then go ahead and watch it. I can watch it once a week. Right, so I get all that choice as an individual. What do you lose when they throw it up there? Well, we lose the synchronicity of watching it when it comes out with other people. Right? There's no more, trying to think back to one, like the last episode of MASH or the last episode of Seinfeld, when we all tune in together to watch this thing. Or even like Lost, I think, was sort of the last one that was like that, where then the show came out and then people would talk about it the next day. Oh, what do you think's happening? What do you think? It's not on. It doesn't matter. That's that battery thing. It's great, right? It's great that we have the choice, but it's different. Right? And what I'm trying to do is to see how can we experience it as different and great, and rather than get into what I'm calling present shock, the shock of this difference. How do we cope with this? How can she talk to executives who don't understand the idea of content as something that constantly refreshes? When you talk to an executive and say, oh, well, you have to understand content isn't just going to sit there. Content's going to constantly change. It's going to be this always-on thing, and your users are going to change it, your audience is going to change it, and it's going to have to dynamically change for someone. What? How am I going to go to bed if my content is constantly changing? I can't sleep at night. Right, so what I've done is I've looked at, and this book is free for you for coming, so I don't have to sell it to you as a book. I just have to sell you to actually read it. Just read. Reading is good. I looked at sort of the 5 different types of present shock. And these are present shock is really just sort of resistance to presentism or confusion about presentism. Sort of pining sometimes what we've lost more than seeing what we've gained. Or being incapable of doing things in this present-based, steady-state digital reality. Being incapable of embracing the now. right? And chasing after kind of false nows and weird simultaneous things. So the first one, and it's kind of a simple one, is what I'm calling narrative collapse, right? And it's the collapse of story, right? If you don't have time, you don't have the ability to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have an audience, right? You have readers, you have users, you have voters who are incapable of engaging with something for what it's going to be later. They don't understand later. Right? The traditional story, you create a character the audience likes, that character goes through all this series of decisions to put them in danger, they get through, to the worst possible place, and then the storyteller comes up with some solution, right? It's the turning point. You have a reversal and a recognition, and then right? Dora wants to rescue the frog and bring it home to its tree, and she has to get through the nasty woods and past the troll bridge and over, and finally stick little frog in his tree so he can sing happily. But she's got to get through all that. Right? The digital devices, our digital mindset, our digital technology makes it so that we don't have to sit through that story anymore. Each moment is disconnected from every other. Each choice is disconnected from every other. Wait a minute, she's here, she chooses this, why is she even bothering with that? It's like, oh my God, I got to wait till the end of that. I'm not going to do that. You can use your remote and you're going to click away because now you have choice. Right? Or fast forward through this or go backwards through that. Right? Stories don't work in a world of remote controls, particularly when people have been abusing stories for so long. Right? When you have advertisers who've used the story format just to screw you. Right, or priests who use story. You're going to have to suffer now, but you're going to get heaven later. Right, just screw later. I don't even believe in later. What is later? I'm in digital time. I want it now. Right, and that doesn't just mean someone is if they say they want something now, that doesn't mean that we're going to end up with this is the present shock version, an unethical, decadent, awful society because no one is tied to the future. It just means we have to find another way of motivating ethical behavior. An ethical behavior, of course, should actually be motivated because it feels better to behave ethically. Right? The reason you don't steal is not because, I could steal something from you. I could steal your dongle, right? I could steal your dongle, get home, no one's going to know. Right? Do I not steal the dongle because I'm afraid of getting caught in the future or of God punishing? No, I don't want to steal the dongle because it's just stupid to steal their dongle. Right? It doesn't respect the commons. It's not the way the world works. I don't enjoy the feeling of stealing the dongle. I don't enjoy it now. Right, but everything changes when we no longer have stories to motivate things. Right, movements in particular. How did movements work through the last 1,000 years, or certainly the last century? Right, you have a great charismatic leader. Right, he tells you, I have a dream. We're going to go over the mountain, keep our eyes on the prize. The ends justify the means, and we're going to win the day. Right, we're going to land a man safely on the moon and stick a flag on the surface, and America will have won. So let's go, everybody. Here we go. It's like that Animal House monologue, right? We're going to do it. Let's go. Right? The Obama campaign. The Obama campaign's an interesting flip, though, right? What did the Obama campaign say? Not, we're going to go get the thing. He said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. That's presentist. Presentist, at least in word, if it wasn't presentist in deed. Right, it was a presentist campaign for an ultimately industrial age administration. But the opportunity, the thing he was talking about was, no, it's now. We are the thing. Right, the present shock reaction to this, the present shock reaction to no more movements, no more eyes on the prize, no more thing, the shock reaction is the Tea Party. Right, there's no time. All right, give me now. Give me now. Stop government. Give me my money now. Give me, right? Now. We're just going to take it back. Right? That's the shock. And I get that. It's presentist, at least. The more mature reaction, believe it or not, is the occupiers. The occupiers was an absolutely presentist movement. It wasn't even a movement. Right? What do you want? What are your demands? We're just here. Well, when is this going to end? Why should it end? What do you want? Can you just say it? We've got the television cameras here. The CNN is here, given 9 seconds. What are your demands? We don't have demands. We're working on consensus. Right? So what Occupy was trying to do in this sort of Burning Man-ish way was to say, we are going to develop a new steady state approach. We are going to develop a new kind of behavior, right? That we are going to live this thing rather than work towards something else. Right? Occupy is the thing. There is no end, it is the end. Right? How does this happen in religion? Right? Religions have always worked by saying, oh, you're going to do all this stuff and then you will be among the saved. Right? It's your traditional story, beginning, middle, end. You're going to do this, you're going to get persecuted, but you're going to do good, and then God's going to reward you. Right? How does that shift in a presentist universe? It becomes experiential. Right? It becomes those kids with a little bracelet saying, what would Jesus do? And you can laugh at that on the one hand, but on the other hand, what is that? It's saying, no, I'm going to bring, my religion is going to be behavioral. It's going to be in the now. It's going to be what I actually do in this moment. Or ecstatic experience of the ravers and their descendants. What does this mean in marketing? It means you have to drop your brand mythology. Right? What makes Keebler cookies good is not that they were baked by little elves in a hollow tree. Right? That story is irrelevant. Right? What makes, do they taste good? And can I know that the thing I'm putting in my mouth is not rat hairs, right? Is not dependent on some little, Lebanese child in a slave factory. Have you ever played with Slavery Footprint? It's an interesting website. It's how many slaves are working for you right now. So I don't care about the history. I don't care. I want to know, what is this? The difference in some ways, the thing that replaces narrative, that replaces stories and TV of the traditional type, is video games. It's computer games. Computer games are consonant with this digital notion of time, because computer games, you don't follow some character through their big story for the most part. You are the character making decisions as you move through something. Right? Video games happen in the present tense. You can't tell a video game in the past tense. Then he did that. Then he did this. Right? It's happening now. And the difference then, the difference in the way you approach a culture, if you're in a video game mindset, is less in terms of agonistic play, as they call it. You're not playing a game to see who wins the game, that it ends and there's a winner. No, you're playing the game to see how long you can play. It's what James Carse would call an infinite game, finite and infinite games. Infinite games are played in order to keep the play going, because the play is happening in the present tense. You're not playing for some future win, you're playing to play. Again, it's in the present. And that's presentist. That's not shocked. For some it is. What are they, my kids are playing video games? The first inklings of that was, remember Dungeons and Dragons? I remember when that was happening in the 1970s, kids were playing Dungeons and Dragons and parents were freaking out. It was as if they were having, I don't even want to say, as if they were strange sex or something. My kid is sitting they're just doing this thing. Who won? Mom, you don't understand at all. Right? Because you're playing Dungeons, you're playing it in order to keep playing it, in order to see how long you can keep this story alive. The trick with video games, though, with computer games, is it moves from choice to choice to choice. Kevin Kelly and What Technology Wants. The smartest thing he said in there is what technology does is it gives you more choice. You have more choices. Sometimes, though, you have more choices than you actually know what to do with. Right? Things become choices that weren't choices before. Everything, we got to customize everything. Oh my God. Customize every little thing about our experience. When you have to choose and choose and choose, what the digital tells us now, you don't even have to, you can choose both. Right? You can choose this and that, and keep them all running simultaneously. And that's when you run into what I'm calling my second syndrome, or second type of present shock, what I'm calling digiphrenia. And digiphrenia comes from having too much choice simultaneously at the same time. too many yous, too many instances of you operating in parallel leads to a digiphrenia. You know, people used to say, oh, the problem with the net and the digital age is information overload. There's too much information. I can't process it. All this information. You know, I've never had a problem with information overload because I can only see so much information at one time. Maybe my computer might have a problem with information. The hard drive is full, but I don't have it. What? No, my problem is not with information overload. It's with multiple instances of me that I can't manage them all at the same time. Right? I was in an airplane. I was in a Lufthansa flight going to Germany, and it had Wi-Fi, and I got this email about doing a talk. That was a money talk, and it was like the day before something else was supposed to happen, and I had a real talk scheduled, and I tried to get into my Google Calendar on the plane, but somebody was trying to do a Skype call using the plane's Wi-Fi, which is, you know, you're not supposed to do that. They crashed the plane's Wi-Fi, and it wasn't until I finally I was jet-lagged, and I got to Berlin, and I'm in the lobby of this hotel. I can't go into my room because I'm there before the schedule of the thing. So then I try to log back into my Google Calendar thing, and my Google Calendar says, you appear to be logging in from more than one place at the same time. We need to verify your identity. And they wanted to send something to my cell phone, which doesn't work in Germany. So I was in a position where Google Calendar believed I was in more places than a human being could actually be at the same moment. Right, so then I said, okay, sure, I can make this. I'm sure I can, because I thought the other thing was the next day, and I agreed to do something, and I actually scheduled myself to be in more than one place at the same time, and ended up in such trouble. It was not good. Right, but that's an artifact of a programmed life. That's an artifact of when we take ourselves, our human selves, and attempt to conform with digitality's ability to have multiple instances of something running at the same time. I mean, that's the beauty of digital, is you can have a zillion instances of the same song. It's infinitely copyable, but we are not. Right? We actually still, as humans, we exist in one place at a time. Right? But if we try to do this other thing, we end up kind of screwed. I mean, it's funny, when we got the clock, you know, the word punctual, I just found out the word punctual used to just mean a stickler for details. It wasn't until the Renaissance era when we put the clock up on the town square and then people could be said, you have to be at work at this time, at that time, that the word punctual meant being on time. You know, so in the industrial age, we did have time. You got to be here now. You got to get over here. You're going to work 9 to 5. We had that. But in a digital world, we end up programming our lives, right? It's not just where we're going to be at a certain moment. It's how we're going to actually move through the whole thing. It's sort of like the difference between saying, okay, you're going to go to the museum from 2 to 3. So you can walk around the Met and see what you want from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. In a digital environment, it's more like going to Disney World at 2, you're going to get slapped into the cart and conveyed through an experience for an hour, right? You no longer even have that sort of agency of serendipity when you're going to move through something. And my issue, and I think our issue needs to be as we become increasingly willing to program more and more of our lives, to fill up our Google Calendars with what it is we're going to be doing at any moment in some future or multiple things. I mean, you guys all have 2 lines on the same, don't you have 2 appointments over at the same time in your Google Calendar that it's going to work itself out somehow later? You know that? We program all of it. We treat time as if it's generic. You know, when we have this clock here, wow, can't see it. When we have this clock here, instead of that one here, this time doesn't feel generic. This feels a little bit after 5, right? This feels a little something. We have a sense of that. This time is generic, right? This is what the Greeks would call chronos, right? Chronos is time of the clock, right? What time is it? It's 5:02, 5:03. And that's a certain kind of time, right? There's this other time that the Greeks talked about called kairos. And kairos meant timing, right? Readiness. It was a good timing. Like if you're going to ask me, you know, what's the best time to tell Dad you crashed the car? 5:03. Or maybe 5:12. No, the best is after he's had his drink, right? Before he's read the paper, whatever. You know, timing is a human thing, right? So as I started to research timing as a human artifact, as a human quality, I started to do all this research into biological clocks and how they work and how many we know about and how many we don't. Did you know scientists and medical professionals through the 1950s thought jet lag was like folklore? They didn't even think it was real. It was Major League Baseball managers who started to notice that their pitchers would do a whole lot worse if they did a trip from the West Coast to the East Coast than if they did a trip from the East Coast to the West Coast. No matter what time of day it was really screwy. And they're like, there must be something here. And they did all this research, and of course they found out there is jet lag. We have biological clocks, day and night, and it gets screwed up more going that way than that way because it's harder to go early than it is to go later. Well, there's other biological clocks. I mean, that's just one biological clock is defined by the sun, but there's tons and tons and tons of others. Right, to the point where you can make a garden that'll actually tell time because different flowers are going to open at different times of the day. There was a guy, I forgot, in Europe, in Scandinavia, that made this clock that you could tell the time over the course of the day by which section would be open and which sections would be closed. But what we're finding out now is that there's all these other rhythms that we ignore at our own peril. So one of them is the lunar cycle. Right? Most women are in touch with a certain 28-day cycle that seems to affect their biology and even their mood. Right? But over a course of 28 days, what we're finding is that different neurotransmitters tend to dominate our brains. Right? In the first week of a new moon, your brain ends up dominated by acetylcholine. In the second week, it's dominated by serotonin. In the third week, it's dopamine. In the fourth week, it's norepinephrine. So if you know now that in the first week of a new moon, everybody's out there on acetylcholine, revving with acetylcholine, you're going, oh, this is a good time to introduce people, to make introductions, to do a little bit of socializing. People are friendly, they're kind of peppy. Oh, now people are going into their serotonin week. What do we do? Now they're going to work. They're going to come up with ideas. They're going to push through. They're going to, oh no, they're moving into their dopamine week. Dopamine, time for the party, office party, ski trip, shoot up a little, do whatever you do, right? This is when you're going to get in your Jack Black phase. You're going to enjoy yourself. And finally, you go into a norepinephrine week. Now you're like, Obama or Tiger Woods. It's calculating. It's fight or flight. You're going to move above the emotional and sort of see the big systems. This is when you should do your web architecture. This is when you should think about your structure and all that. But if you know that, you can ride it, right, rather than fight against it. If you're just sitting up with 323, you're not aware of any of that. And that's just one of tons of these kinds of clocks that are actually working us. And we can work with them, or we can continue to fight against them. We can pretend they're not there. One way that we neglect those clocks, that we ignore these clocks, is with the third syndrome that I'm talking about, which is I'm calling overwinding. Right? Overwinding is what happens in a presentist world when we try to take the effects of long-term thinking or a long-term investment or long-term something and jam it all into one little moment. Right? I got the idea for this after reading Stuart Brand's The Clock of the Long Now, which is a great book, where what he wants us to do is to think about time in 10,000-year cycles rather than these sort of short, daily, short-term thinking. He wants us to have 10,000 years. The problem with thinking about things like in 10,000-year cycles is, all right, I'm finished with my bottle of water. I got this plastic cap. Is there a recycle bin around? And it's like, all right, there's not. So now it's like, all right, so I'll just throw it. But if I'm going to throw this out and be aware of the 10,000-year cycle, it's like, oh gosh, this is 10,000 years I'm throwing into here. Right? To me, that's not a long now. To me, that's sort of a short forever. Right? It's in this moment now is I'm getting the weight of this entirety of this decision, and I can't think that way. Right? The short forever is an easier example would be the Housewives of Orange County. Say, have you ever seen that show? The Housewives of Orange County is about middle-aged women with lots of plastic surgery who have misunderstandings. Right? They have miscommunication. And I'm big into communication, so I'm like, why are these people so miscommunicating? The reason they're miscommunicating is because their faces have been paralyzed with surgery and Botox. So they'll say, oh, I'm sorry about, your daughter's divorce. but they're smiling while they're saying, I'm sorry about your daughter's divorce. And then the other one is like, oh, she didn't mean that, right? And why doesn't she think she meant it? Because her face is frozen, right? So these women, in trying to lock in one moment, right, compress the age 29 onto their faces, they end up making the real moment that they're in unavailable to them, right? So they've taken the false present shock, temporally compressed now that they think they got through all this choice of Botox and filler, and they've lost access to the real one, to what's actually happening in the moment, right? Another one is algorithmic and ultra-fast trading. Right? It used to be, I mean, the way the stock market worked in my old day was you would buy a stock of a company that you thought was going to then do better over time. So you put the money in now, hoping that 5 or 10 years from now, you'd have more money. Right? Now, do you remember the day that Facebook had its IPO? People bought Facebook stock, and then they're like disappointed an hour later when it isn't worth more. They're not trying to invest in a company, they're trying to make money on the trade itself. Trying to make money in the very act of investing is supposed to somehow feed back instantly as growth. You know, that just doesn't work. So, and if it doesn't work in stocks, so what do? So then we're going to take a derivative, just like you do in anything, right? Instead of distance, we're going to go to speed. Instead of speed, we're going to go to acceleration. Instead of acceleration, we're going to go to power. So they do, instead of a stock, we're going to do a derivative of the stock. So we're going to bet now on the speed at which the stock goes up or down, or we're going to bet on the volatility of the stock, or we're going to bet on the volatility of volatility, or the volatility of volatility of volatility, in order to somehow jam into this moment the equivalent of what used to be investing. And now you've got algorithms that are out there doing nothing but trying to slow down the rate at which the stock market computers work so they can do ultra-fast trading at a greater advantage. Right, so if you're trying to buy a stock, there's algorithms that see what your trade is going to be before your trade goes through so they can then act on it and profit off it. Right, so these are companies and programs literally trading in your future. Right? They have actually time traveled. Right? Another kind of overwinding we experience, or compression, is the mashup. Right? The mashup is a beautiful way of kind of trying to reconcile what's happening. Mashup is our century's equivalent of cubism. You know, if cubism sort of let you look at really from multiple places at the same time, mashup lets you look multiple times at the same place. Right? It's a subtle difference, but it's a real one. Right? Mashup, you can take all the different cultural references from all history about one thing and then mash them into one thing. Right? That's the kind of time travel we're trying to do. And economically, that's really the clearest shift of all. Economically, we've gone from the industrial age model of money, right, which money was invented. I mean, we know the money that we use was invented around 11 or 1200, and all the peer-to-peer currencies were outlawed, all the grain-based currencies, all the trading systems, all the favor banks, all the time dollars and things like let systems of the 10th and 11th century were made illegal, and instead we use money, right? Money that is a clock. That's the way our money works. Money is borrowed from a central bank, and it has to be paid back at interest. Time is built into money. Time is money, is the slogan of the industrial age. Right? That's why companies have to grow. That's why they have to do faux acquisitions, to create the illusion of growth so they can pay back their debt. It's just like, you know, when you're going to get another mortgage on your house, and hopefully one that makes it look like you own a greater stake in your house, even though you're not really doing anything. Right? What's the digital age equivalent of that? Well, it's actually moving towards a peer-to-peer economy, a peer-to-peer transactional economy, through things like Kickstarter, where you actually raise money from the people. You just avoid all that. You're not going to go to a bank and borrow money on time, right? You're just going to get money from the people that actually want the thing that you want to do. Right? You're going to begin to see transactional currencies arise. I mean, that's what Greenspan was talking about in one of his last testimonies to Congress. He says, when it's going to get interesting is when we start seeing competition against these central currencies. Because he could actually see the writing on the wall, that we're moving from this sort of storage-based monetary medium to a transactional-based one. Storage is what? Over time. Transactional is what? in the now, from the potential energy of money to the kinetic energy of money, to the static power of capital, right, to the power of a currency in increasing velocity. Now, the irony in all this, to me anyway, is that these new supposedly digital age companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter are still wed to the industrial age economy. Right? These are not digital age companies. These are industrial age companies using digital products. Right? We have yet to see the beginning of the digital age companies. Maybe app.net is one of the digital age companies, right? Let's just try this. Let's get some money from people and try to make this thing where we're all going to own everything. And we don't see that at all. These companies, the ones that we're still working for, they're just all beholden to their shareholders, and they're all obligated to grow. Right? The obligation to growth is an industrial age artifact. The obligation to grow has nothing to do with anything. We're full grown. We're full grown. Colonialism is over. We've done it. We're here. We're in a steady state world. What does that look like? Let's go read our John Stuart Mill and see. Right? But what happens, and this is the fourth and almost last one of these syndromes, what happens is instead of moving into the steady state economy, right, most companies and businesses and people, they're trying to maintain control. Right? This is what I'm calling fractalnoia. Right? Fractalnoia is when you really see too many patterns, when you try to make direct associations between things that are really just kind of self-similar. Fractalnoia is when, because you no longer have time and stories to make sense of things, you try to make sense of everything in the present tense. So something happens here, there's an earthquake from a tsunami over here. Well, it must have been the HARP station over there because there's this negotiation. You ever listen to like Art Bell and Coast to Coast? Listen to the connections everybody makes between everything. The way a company would do it, it's the nonsense of data mining, right? Data mining and doing factor analysis on human populations as if we really can be predicted in that way, as if humans are that rather than strange, anomalous, wonderful things. It's the difference between data mining and genuine pattern recognition, right? Real pattern recognition you don't do by looking at data and trying to find exact correlations. Real pattern recognition you do almost by pulling back, by softening your gaze. Right? Real pattern recognition is much more Eastern than it is Western. It's for those Easterners who, when you do experiments and you have people from the East and West look at the same picture, the Westerners will say, oh, it's a picture of a cow. And the Easterner will say, oh, no, it's a picture of a field. Right? They see it as a field with a cow in it. We see it as a cow in a field. You do pattern recognition when you can see the field again. Right? But it's not subject-oriented. It's background-oriented. That's presentism. It's where are we now? Right? The other, well, this is almost too big a thing to go into, but I'll hint at it for you, is people and companies are very uncomfortable with rapid feedback cycles, the kinds of feedback cycles that actually draw fractals to begin with. In the old days, you would plant your seeds. I'm going to plant them 6 inches apart. 3 months later, you come back and say, oh, the flowers did, the crop did pretty well. Next time, I'm going to try putting them 3 inches apart. So you put them 3 inches apart. 3 months later, you find, oh, they grew better. Right? So your feedback cycle was about 3-4 months, right? You put the thing in, you get your feedback. Now, what happens when you're living in a digital universe is your feedback is instantaneous, right? It's so instantaneous that did those tweets happen because of this thing we did, or did we do this thing because of those tweets that you don't even know anymore, right? You're in this constant feedback cycle. When it's that fast of feedback, it's like taking a microphone and putting it next to the speaker. All you get is screech, right? And how do you parse that screech? How do you slow it down enough to be able to see it? Being able to parse the cause and effects is irrelevant, right? There are no more cause and effects because we're outside time. We didn't do this to lead to that. Instead, we're in this dance. We're surfing this thing. And that's a place that can put you into panic, or it's a place that can make you feel really good if you understand that we're living in a sustainable story rather than one that has to be won or lost. Right? Which brings me to the final syndrome, and what I call apocalypto. Right? A lot of the people, and these are people like me, my peers, my fellow whatever we are, digital thinker type people, right? They get to that place of constant feedback and it's all going da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They can't leave it there. They can't accept that we're living in a world that's in the present tense, where everything's steady state, where everything's happening, where we've moved from the hard drive into RAM, and this is where we live. Instead, they say, we're going to be here until the singularity happens. We're going to be here until we flip over the lip of the chaos attractor at the end of time and move through into another reality. We're going to be here until, until that. Now, why are they doing it? Oh, emergence is going to come. We're going to go into a new state of complexity and blah. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because they're still stuck in the industrial age, story-based Christian narrative, whatever it is, of something's going to happen. Right? And then they write these great books, right? Reality is just information's quest to achieve greater states of complexity. And human beings are one great chapter along that journey of information into the ionosphere of singular complexity. And that's BS. That has the medium and the message reversed. Right? We are actually present. We are here. Ray Kurzweil cannot take human consciousness and put it on a silicon chip. Right? The more we understand about humans and even the genome, the less we understand about how it actually works. We decide it's DNA one day, then we find out, it's actually the protein soup that the DNA is in. We decide consciousness is a stream. Oh, no, consciousness is a pulse. Oh, no, consciousness is this. So I don't care what you're going to put on the web. Right? That's not going to be us. Right? We're strange and quirky. Most of us don't even know that we have a 28-day cycle of 4 different weeks. So how can you upload? Which you're going to put? You're going to put up the acetylcholine me or the norepinephrine me? Or the dopamine me? Right? They don't get it. They really don't get it. And God bless them, right? But we're all in that place, right? It's easier for us to imagine the zombie apocalypse than for us to imagine another week or two of living like this in the present tense. And the zombie apocalypse looks like a relief, right? I'm just going to sit up on a mountaintop, get a big gun, and shoot off the things. They move slow. At least I won't have to answer my fucking email anymore, right? So I understand that. I have a bit of present shock in me myself, right? But it's fun stuff to look at, and I think accepting that we've moved into a presentist reality, accepting that it's no more about leaning into the future, can actually reorient us. And finally, and this is what I'm arguing in the Apocalypto chapter, finally reconnect us with what it means to be human. And the beauty of the digital is that it sets up the contrast. We can see what's the difference between these programs and us, right? What is that difference? We can use this stuff, but let it conform to us. I made a little list, just if this was all too abstract, I made a simple list just to try to get you with repetition, right? The difference between this one and that one, right? This, the industrial age clock, the nice round clock, this is about segments, right? Time is segmented. Time is cyclical. Here, time is a duration, right? Time is absolute. Right? Think about money in these two different environments. Money here is interest over time. Money there is peer-to-peer. Investment here is something you invest in for the future. Here, you trade. Here you have stocks. Here you have algorithms. In art, here you have cubism, right? Multiple places in one time. Here you have mashup, multiple times in one place. In politics, here you have movements. There you have Occupy. In music, right? Here you have albums. Here you have iTunes or Spotify. Right? In entertainment, these are stories and books and movies. These are video games and religion. Right? Here's mythic narrative. Here's experiential, ecstatic experience. In branding, here's Coke. Here is Pepsi. It's kind of the easiest way to say it. Right? In an operating system, this is the metaphor. Right? This is Apple. This is the desktop. Know what this is? This is actually Windows 8, which we may not be ready for. It's a great system, but I can't use it. Can you? But it's more consonant. They actually get something. Right? Windows 8, when you look at that, what is happening now? These are all the feeds that are coming at you. It's the first operating system, which is not a metaphor. It just is. That's why we're not ready for it. We still need some of these metaphors in order to guide ourselves. But our kids or our children's children, they're going there. Right? They're going there into a live, real-time world. And I would say let's not worry about them so much doing that. Right? Because being in real time doesn't mean letting go of ethics, doesn't mean letting go of love. If anything, this got over-corrupted by all that other stuff. This is all about doing things for something else. right? If we learn to actually do things for what we're doing them for, right? I'm doing this because I'm doing this, and we end up with a much more holistic, much more congruent, and much more honest approach to living. Okay, that's the first time I've talked about this book. That's kind of strange, and I think it makes sense in a certain kind of way. Do you guys have thoughts or questions? You know, because this is a prototype. This is a prototype. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have time to talk a little bit? What's our deal? I'm going to be signing books up here, which are free once again. Free. They bought them.
Take a few minutes. Let's take about 8 minutes or 9 minutes for questions, and then we can set
Sure.
the table while we're doing that.
Okay.
And get ready for the book fight.
Do you have thoughts about this, or I can apply it to your business strategies? She's just waving that she can help. Or do you have a question? Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've always shied away from bringing spiritual into my talks, largely because I've had so many extremely negative, cult-like spiritual experiences that it's made me suspicious of everything from New Age to traditional Judaism. I mean, I'm like banned by the UJC and everything. So I've gotten it from all sides. On the other hand, I take that to heart, and I feel like this is an opportunity to kind of disengage spirituality from all of these institutions and mythologies that have sucked it into corrupt, sexist, evil bloodshed. And if people actually saw it as spirituality as something that's actually happening in the moment, every moment, then how can they push you off center? I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah. In the same way, it's about then how do we do politics and activism without parties? How do we do, all these things? How do we maintain it? It's like, how do you maintain education in a MOOC-like atmosphere? Okay, so it's all a la carte. Everybody can have every little course they want every time. Well, how do they get tradition? How do they find out the disciplines? How do you develop that? Yeah. Economy becoming obsolete? The economy is obsolete, right? We are running a digital economy on a 13th century monetary operating system. Right? It's not even, I mean, it's a printing press era operating system that managed to survive the electric age, right? But will be done in, right? We've seen that the infinite recursive loop began the moment that this derivatives exchange bought the New York Stock Exchange. It happened, I think, a month or two ago. The derivative exchange bought the stock exchange. What does that mean? The derivative of the derivative exchange is going to buy the derivative exchange, and so on and so on and so on. It's the infinite recursive loop has begun, and it will float off into irrelevance, right? And it has to. The other reason it will is because money's gotten too expensive, right? People understand now that when Obama says, oh, the way I'm going to save the economy in Lansing, Michigan, is I'm going to give money to a bank so they loan money to GM, so GM puts up a plant so they can build cars that you only need because this company lobbied to make your workplace so far from where you live that you need a car to get there. It's like, something's wrong with this picture, right? And people get that now. They understand that if they have skills and these people have needs, that we have the basis of an economy, and we don't actually need this interloper in order to this Walmart thing to land here and suck all the value out of our what we do. Some people get it; other people are getting poor. Yeah, but when the majority of people get it, it's unfortunately it's not that we don't move. We don't move to new things generally because, we get that there's a better way. We move to new things because the way that we've been trying to do really, really stops working. And my faith is that we would move towards barter exchanges and time dollars before we would move to Mad Max. And I think we would, but that's where it would come. I mean, we're looking at something now I'm not talking about the next 10 years. We are at the brink of something that this last one was basically, depending on how you look at it, it was at least 1,000 years old, right? It might have been, you could call it 2,000 or 3,000 years old if you started with the invention of text, which is what invented history, right? With the invention of text, we got accountability. With the invention of text, we got contracts. I will say now what's going to happen later. We got a contract with God. We got a history as a people. We had a future with a Messiah and a past with creation. That's sort of when this started. The printing press era and the invention of the clock really solidified it and led to the industrial age. But in some ways, you could say this one goes back. The change that we're experiencing now is as big as the change in the axial age. The big is the shift to farming and text. So it's going to take a while to play out. It's the two paths that I'm interested in. One is the My Life Bits path, which is like the Facebook path. The My Life Bits and Gordon Bell, it's like, I'm going to document every single thing that I've ever done forever, right? Everything. So you end up with this long line of every letter, every poop, everything. It's like, it's like this timeline of you. Versus, say, what Jerry Mikowski tries to do with the brain software. So every time he meets someone or hears something, he puts it in this sort of web of connections. So for Mikowski, he's getting a record, but his record is fluid. Every dimension from every place from which he looks at it, it renders a different thing. It's a malleable, liquid history versus locking down your history as some kind of an archive. So I think the future of social media will be less towards the tweakification of my profile to the world and more about the ability to recall and refresh my series of associations, over time. So I think there's a future for it. It's just not this, and it's got to be. We've got to own our own data. As people start to see, what the real driving engine of a Facebook is, they will eventually have to leave it. But it's a different world. The world that I grew up in was one where you'd go to like Spencer Gifts in the mall, you'd buy some posters, and you'd stick it up on the walls of your bedroom, right? And you would look at it and sort of reflect, do I still like NSYNC or do I like Farrah, whatever it is, whatever, that is my era, right? Whatever things you have on the wall, maybe you'd bring a friend in and they'd look and they go, oh, you shouldn't have that poster, that's not cool anymore, right? But now your poster is your wall. You don't buy your posters, it's not reflecting in, it's reflecting out. So it's this constantly broadcast, publicized, disseminated sense of self, which is, I don't think will last. I don't think it will, because it's ultimately, it's very hard to create an identity in absolute public all the time. As broadcast, as performance. Yeah. I'll say a few things. One, I do believe that kids' time in school, that 9 to 3 or 8 to 3 time that they get, is some of the only training they will get in live interaction with other people, right? There's this 94% of communication that happens non-verbally that you don't get online, which is why there's so many kind of social inhibitions and presentational problems and language problems and inability to, even without the plastic surgery, they can't tell what's going on. It's like we all, when we're online, we're all living with a kind of an Asperger's, right? Where we can't make sense of facial expression because they're not there. So I'm the last one to say, put their face in their iPad, unless they were going to have their face in the book already, or unless they're going to take the test already, unless that's where their textbook was. That's fine, but not as a replacement for the communication. I think the object of the game should always be helping students think critically about every environment in which they're learning, about every interface they're using. So if you're going to be not using books, but using all these other things, then they have to know something about how they're programmed, something about how they're put together. They have to understand, okay, now I'm using Blackboard. How does Blackboard make me feel? What does Blackboard do? Where does Blackboard limit my behavior? Why is it limiting my behavior? Why are they trying to make their money? Who made this? What do they want from me? And that's real. It's very easy for us to accept, particularly if we're kids who grew up with these technologies, we accept them at face value. Right? We see them as pre-existing conditions of the universe, and we don't question who made them, why did they make them, and what do they want from me, right? Because it's just there. Like I look at the streets of New York, I just thought they were streets. That's city. That's not just city, that's a grid pattern that was designed by certain people to promote certain kinds of behaviors, to promote the growth of money and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole, there's an agenda embedded in the program of the city, just as there's an agenda programmed into those things. So I'm a big advocate. I work at Codecademy. I'm all for telling people to gotta learn to code. That if you're not programming, you're being programmed. So I think kids by 4th grade, as soon as they learn their first long division algorithm, they should learn how to offload that algorithm to a machine. Just take 2 weeks to teach them in BASIC even. I don't care. Do it in Scratch if you can do long division. Do it in Minecraft, wherever. And teach them, see those machines are really good at algorithms. That's what they do. That's how they work. You teach them to do, they're really stupid people. They're really stupid objects that can do stuff if you teach them really carefully. So once that's done, the other big change is that the teacher is no longer the provider of information, which is what the teacher used to be. The teacher learned a lot of stuff and then fed that stuff to kids. Now kids have access to more information than any one of us can hold. So in some sense, that frees us up from having to know everything. And instead, what are we? Instead, we're on the one hand, we're their access to legacy, right? To what's the story, in a sense, of how this got here. But more importantly, we can help them connect information and evaluate information in ways that they can't. So we need to actually model a process. We need to model for them, how is information connected? How do you connect this point to that point, to that point, to that point, in order to get a picture of what's happening? It's a different role. It's a partner in knowledge acquisition, and in pattern recognition is really the biggie now. How do you begin, okay, you've seen 3 of those now, what's the pattern? What are you actually getting from this? And that's it's a steady state, real-time way of educating. Yeah. Yeah. Yes and no. Yes and no. Bitcoin is a digital way of doing a scarcity-based central currency. Do you know what I mean? Bitcoin it's a step in a certain direction, in that it has anonymity, and that there's a bunch of stuff, but it's not a reconception of currency. It's just a digital version of an artificially scarce 13th century currency model. The artificial scarcity of currency is not necessary for currency to have value. The artificial scarcity of currency was only implemented in order for people who had money and exclusive province over lending it to be able to make money by having money. Because if people kept just bringing their grain in from the fields and getting grain receipts and they were able to trade with that, how could we control their transactions? We can't. So we have to outlaw all those other kinds of money and have this one scarce thing. Because without scarcity, it has no value because it's not based in anything. Right, so it was a very clever way for colonial empires to expand and to turn people who were a rising bourgeois middle class back into employees, back into investors, back into controllable people who can't transact and create and exchange value on their own, but it's not genuinely consonant with a digital economy. Value can come from in a decentralized way. Value comes from the periphery, and we can trade ourselves. Etsy, is a much more innovative stab in some ways at currency even than Bitcoin is. And when Etsy starts using non-traditional currencies, then it's when you start to watch out. But people won't value them until they can't get the real stuff, right? Until they can't get the cash. Then they're going to go, well, we need another way. Yeah. I don't generally apply an evolutionary model to culture because I feel like they're sort of operating on quantum different levels. I do think that memes, fight in some semiotic landscape, in the same ways and similar ways to the way genes fight on a biological landscape, but I don't really see cultural evolution so much as, I don't know, it's just not the way I see things changing. I don't even really know if I believe in paradigm shifts as such, unless you look at them centuries later. But I do think that there's a living relationship between human beings and the technologies they use. So I wouldn't say that text caused the Bible and monotheism, but I would say they were very consonant and informed each other as they went. And there are these moments in history when a new medium or new technology ends up being really consonant with a deeper cultural sort of drive towards something different or better. And we're at one of those lucky moments. I think sometimes the new technology or new thing can come along when we don't have that hunger and it doesn't really do anything. You know, it's like, oh, we got space travel and that stuff, but we didn't decide to go colonize Mars or anything. It was like, oh, that was cool, and we just stopped. You know, so I think it goes back and forth. As for Buddhism, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I see, you know, the problem is, I don't want to get into this, like, The Power of Now. What was that book by, yeah, you know, that whole thing. I don't know. It just starts to get so estified for me. Or like The Secret or something. You know, my ability to experience life transforms with my ability to see it in this other way, and it just goes nutsy on me. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like Buddhism and all, that's so personal on a certain level. You know, for me, the image of Buddhism is Bodhisattva sitting under a tree by himself. You know, the reason I used psychological terms in this book, or faux psychological terms like phrenia and that, was because I feel like Freud was the sort of the master of the self and the sub-self, and that's the 20th century. I'm looking at what is this collective psychology. You know, I'm interested in our culture, in us as a society. So, you know, while I think Buddhism is cool and all, I don't see Buddhism as quite this social, collective process. You know, it's something that individuals have to do, and I just don't mess with individuals because, you know, everybody's got their own thing going on. So I try not to get into the individual head, you know. Yeah, in the back. Things change, right? I just don't use evolution to describe it, right? Because it gets messy into like emergence and all that. And emergence, I mean, all these guys, you know, you got a guy like Dawkins, right? A guy like Dawkins out there saying, you know, that there's no spark at the middle of matter. It's just information, you know. But these same guys who say there's no God, there's no thing, there's no essence, there's no spirit, they all talk about emergence. Ooh, there's this magical moment when, I mean, and it's a big hand wave. I mean, I love emergent theory and all that, but we know as little about the way that a system changes state suddenly from this to that as we do whether God waved a magic wand to make all the people. So there's a whole mess that I don't even need to go into when I've got just other ways of describing these things in terms of clocks and Keebler elves and other stuff. Yeah, in the very back. Oh, I think it happened. I'm kind of like a Jehovah's Witness in that respect. You know how they said the apocalypse and the Armageddon? It already happened. We're just sort of finding out about it. So yeah, I think, you know, the Toffler in the 1970s was writing about future shock, and change is going to keep changing faster than change can change, and we all got to lean to the future and become futurists. We've got to teach futurism in school, you know, because we're going to all connect, because we're going to move into this other thing, and pervasive and real time, and gender changing, and birth control, and all these things are going to make people more choice. We're here. You know, I think finally, and even if we're not, I'm declaring us here. Because it's just like, let's just be here. I mean, get like Richard Alpert, let's just be here now. It happened. We're here. This is it. We've arrived. You know, and once you go, we've arrived, we don't have to have a revolution anymore. We won the revolution. Revolution's up, we won. Oh, we won? Yeah, we won. This is it. We're here. We won. No, George, but he just doesn't know about it yet. It's okay. He'll find out. You know, we've won. You know, and if you do that, it's so much easier, right? I don't have any struggle. There's no struggle. Yeah. It could be fun, you know? I mean, why not? Yeah, there's value because we're you know, you can't really move completely into kinetic energy, right? You can't go completely into kinetic energy. There's still potential. There's still unrealized potentials. But it's a matter, I think, of balance, right? We moved into a completely forward-moving, future-based, goal-oriented, blinders, ends justify the means, narrative modality. And what we're doing now is going, whoa, you know, there's this present. It's not like the present went away while we were future-based. And it's not like the future goes away when we're present-based, but there's a shift in emphasis, right? There's a bias to the digital media environment that we're living in, right? And that we know a lot of them. It's more distributive, it's more replicative, and I'm arguing it's also more presentist. And because of that, if we want to build political movements and entertainment and social programs and mindsets that are more consonant with it, we had best start thinking about what are the contours of presentism, because then we're going to grow better in that soil.
So what do you think? Sign some books?
I would love to sign some books. So I'll be here. We can talk more at the table. Okay, thanks a lot. And thanks for being guinea pigs on this. It means a lot to me.